The Constitution establishes several commissions. One of them is the one established by Article 230 of the Constitution. There is established the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. The Salaries and Remuneration Commission has been given several powers. The powers and functions of the SRC shall be to set and regularly review the remuneration and benefits of all state officers, advise the national and county governments on the remuneration and benefits of other public officers. In performing its functions, the Commission shall take the following principles into account. 1, the need to ensure that the total public compensation bill is fiscally sustainable. 2, the need to ensure that the public services are able to attract and retain the skills required to execute their functions, the need to recognize productivity and performance, and transparency and fairness. Powerful commission. Yes? Yes. The chairperson of that commission, serving this time, is Lyn Mengich. She's our guest in the Situation Room. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Situation Room. That's the hot seat of Kenya's biggest conversation. How does it feel?
Good.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
not as hot as your own seat, right? Yours is hotter, especially with what you've been doing lately. But karibu sana.
Asante.
If City were here, he'd have given you the day's proverb. He always has a proverb. Every week, new proverbs from one country in Africa. This week, he gave me that job, and I am not doing it so well, but I'll do it anyway. The proverbs this week are from a region in West Africa. This region is occupied by people who are called the Songhai people. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, you know those countries. Now, the proverb for today: the river is too large, but it still wants to become bigger. The river is too large, but it still wants to become bigger. What's your interpretation of this?
Well, in the context of our mandate as a commission, then, you'd be saying we've got a wage bill. It is currently at about 43%, thereabout, of the revenue. But we still want it to be bigger than that. Our target is actually 35%, meaning that we have not reached the target.
Yep.
But nonetheless, we have to review pay. So I would see it in that context.
Our wage bill is large, but it still wants
to be bigger.
bigger.
For good reasons.
I wonder what those good reasons are.
Good reasons.
What would the good reasons be? I mean, when we say that it should be 30%, 35%,
yeah.
Who determines this?
It's in the
Who sets this?
Public Finance Management Act. So it is it's a legislation.
It's a legal requirement.
Yes, and it's also
that
in
our
the
public wage
regulations.
bill should not go beyond 35%
of revenue.
of our revenue.
Yes.
Which revenue?
It's ordinary revenue.
Which ordinary revenue for which year? Are we looking at this year's wage bill should not exceed last year's ordinary revenue? Or is it the last audited accounts?
Actually, the Act doesn't specify, but as a commission, we take current because wages is current.
Yeah.
So since you're spending on current, not in the past, then we use the current.
Okay.
Yes.
So
But we also project, for the next financial year. Yeah.
So when you say we are at 43%, you're basing it on the 2.2 trillion shillings or thereabouts that KRA declared as ordinary revenue.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. Indu.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes,
but let's go
quite a
slowly.
number. All right. So, I mean, even as we get into the review and the results of that were announced yesterday, let's look at some of these numbers that you talk about, saying that of revenue, essentially money that is collected by the nation, the target is to not spend more than 35% of that total amount on wages. And this is recurrent, as you say, recurrent every month, wages that we are paying to states and state officers and civil servants, right? In the event that it shoots beyond 35%, which is the case, what pressure or what challenge does that now place on your offices as the commission?
It starts with where did we start from? Because that's important. you will see that from 2017 it was around 51%. So what has been happening is that the Commission has been managing it down, and we are now seeing a trajectory, as I said, about 43, and it's projected to 40%. So we have to take into account the context. Where did we come from before that legislation was put in place, before SRC was set up? So it's actually coming down, and that's what the Commission will continue to do. However, it doesn't mean that we don't have challenges and some realities. And so one of the realities I would like to share is the fact that we are a developing country with a population growth rate that is pretty high. We've got a large population below 18. What does that mean? It means that we must continue employing in the education sector. We are yet to attain the ratio of student to teacher as required internationally. So it means we will continue to recruit teachers so that we can achieve the required ratios and deliver quality education. As a country, we look at the ratio of healthcare workers to population. We are below the WHO standards. So again, we must continue to recruit. Another important sector is security sector. Again, in security, we are still below the required standards of security to population. So what it then means is, much as we have the 35% regulation, we also have to look at the context of our country today and acknowledge that the services must reach the population. We are not there yet. So, and that is what we have to balance is, yes, we've got to manage the wage bill, but the reality is we've got to deliver services. And it is therefore something that we can say is justifiable, that we must reach the citizens with the services. Not just to say we must achieve the 35, it's a question of a balance.
It's a balance between those. So there is the number of people offering the service, and there's the amount of money paid to each individual offering the service. Which of those two is the bigger mandate for you? Like you're saying, you're looking at balancing and the need. The reality on the ground is that we need more people to deliver services. Does that mean that we need to pay more to those more people that we are paying, that are delivering services?
Not necessarily, because when we look at what are the drivers for the wage bill, because, I think that's the first thing is to ask is what is driving the wage bill. So one is numbers, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to achieve the 35%, what are the things we must look at to get there? The first one of those is, which is not an SRC mandate, is revenue. As revenue goes up, you will definitely see that the ratio will come down. So one of the big conversations, and you will see yesterday in our discussion, we had the CS National Treasury, because there is a very important factor that the Treasury plays in terms of revenue. So that's one big thing that we must watch is, it's not about the absolute amount of wage bill that we should be worried about. It is the ratio to revenue, which means that if we grow the revenue, actually we would not have a big problem. Then the balance would come. We would then be able to recruit more in the essential services and still be able to attain that ratio. Now, so that's one. The other lever is what we do as a commission on a day-to-day to manage the wage bill. And it's got two elements. One is that we've got an obligation to continue reviewing pay for good reasons, and I can share those reasons. But we also have another obligation to make sure that the wage bill is being spent in the right way, so that we don't have public resources being wasted. So so we look at both. We look at both in terms of, we still must attract and retain skills, so we must therefore increase pay, but at the same time we interrogate how it's being spent, and that's a very important factor for us. The third one that is important in this conversation is about productivity. And it's about simply baking a bigger cake than we can share. If we are more productive as a nation, then we would be able to generate enough for all of us to share. we are not doing very well as a country on that one, right? In 2021, ILO statistics on productivity ranked Kenya 155 out of 181 globally, right? In Africa, 22 out of 46. So that tells us there is something also to do with our own productivity as a country.
Yeah.
If we're more productive, we get a bigger cake, then we get to the 35% very easily.
Is this productivity that we're talking about productivity for internal consumption, or are we talking about productivity for then external consumption, whereby there's a surplus that has been then realized? Or what are we talking about? Or creating a balance between the two?
First of all, that productivity and the numbers I shared is not about just public service. It's the entire country. So it's the labor productivity for Kenya as a whole. If your labor productivity is low, it actually means, as an example, that even if you look at manufacturing, right, it means you're not competitive because your cost of production is lower than it should be.
Yes.
Right? And you can pick other sectors, even if you're talking about agriculture. It means even our productivity there is lower, which means that our cost of goods is higher than it would be. So it impacts our competitiveness as a nation. If you look at the public service, it speaks to how efficiently we utilize the resources therein, right?
Yeah.
It means that we can do more with less.
Yes.
As a public service. So if we were more productive, then we would actually be able to deliver more services for less costs. So that's what that productivity would do. It would enable us, for one, that the whole country is more productive, which means that there is more revenue, right? Because revenue comes from production in the private sector.
Yes.
So if the private sector is more productive, then obviously we generate more revenue.
Yeah.
But it also means better service delivery to the citizens from the public service.
Right.
Because then we are able to focus on the outcomes, not the processes. Because productivity talks about what are the outcomes
of what. Yeah. So we're putting the pieces together, and all of this then forms then the decisions in the review that you've made.
Yes.
That has come out. One of the things you mentioned was wastage. And then we've seen, this is this big review that we've seen, but we've seen the mentioning of certain things over time. There's been scrapping of allowances. There's been reduction of several things. When we're talking about out-of-city travel, we've seen that has also been reviewed downwards. Has all of this come from what you deem as a commission as wastage, and what does wastage look like? Again, as we're looking at the pieces to put together to what came out yesterday.
Yes, when it talks about and Eric mentioned earlier at the beginning that basic salary is probably not the problem because those ones you can control. Wastage comes from discretionary expenditure in the sense that I don't necessarily have to spend. For example, I'll give an example of the allowances that we said yesterday should cease to apply. So an institution decides to form committees internally to do the work that you are appointed to do and pay an allowance. So we're saying that is double compensation. Or you want to develop a policy and you go for a retreat. But remember, you're doing the job you are appointed to do policy work, because someone must be appointed to do policy. But what do? You pay retreat allowance. So again, you can see that is double compensation. Or you form task forces within the institution. Now, we are then saying those task forces are discharging the mandate of that institution. So surely it must have been allocated to someone. So why are you then paying a task force on top of your salary? Now come to the per diem. That is the domestic, the travel allowance. The issue there today is we have allowances in different clusters, right? So if you travel to Mombasa, the cities, you get more. If you travel to other towns, you get less. What does that mean is that everybody travels to the large cities. So you find everyone, whether you're from western part of the world or Rift Valley, you're all going to Mombasa. right? Those in Mombasa are going to Nairobi or elsewhere. So what that means is that you're actually spending much more than the allowance, the DSA. What we are worried about there is the cost of travel and time that you're spending, which we don't cost, right? So this review says, let it be uniform across the country. That then means that you can actually have your meetings at the nearest location. You may not save on the DSA, but you save on the other hidden costs that come with traveling to the cities to get the higher allowance.
So now you've normalized and regularized. There's nothing like city and town and village.
No. Kenya
as long
is
as
Kenya.
you're out of office.
We have said within a radius of 50 kilometers.
You can only go within a radius. What if you go beyond the 50 kilometers?
You can only claim once you go beyond the 50, because within 50, it is your normal
duty.
Your normal duty station. Yes, please.
You're within office.
Yeah, you're within office.
Let's do a bit of some definitions, because there's always these two terms, public and state. Who are public officers and who are state officers?
Public officers is everyone who works for the public service. It includes state officers.
Okay.
But when we then say state officers, they are defined in the Constitution. It actually says who is a state officer. And to define starting from the president. So basically, the executive, presidency, CSS, PSS, constitutional commissions, the judiciary, that's the judges, magistrates. In the legislature, it will be all the senators, the MPs, the county assemblies. So that's state officers.
Okay.
Then the Constitution, then the others calls other. That's why it says state and other
officers.
Public officers. So other then defines everyone else, from civil service, from disciplinary forces, the teachers. It will also include the state-owned enterprises, so universities. So the rest now becomes other public officers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then there are various employers in this public space. There's the Public Service Commission, the Parliamentary Service Commission, the Judicial Service Commission, the National Police Service Commission. Then you have the military, also the Defense Forces. They're an employer. You go to the counties, you have the County Public Service Board, the County Assembly Public Service Board. All of these operate sort of different, or are they all bound by the SRC's recommendations?
All these are employers, as you rightly put it. The employer has a responsibility that goes beyond remuneration. They have, for example, roles that to do with general terms and conditions of service. Those ones for Parliament, for example, they look at facilitation of members of Parliament to do their work. But when it comes to remuneration, then the Constitution is very clear. For state officers, the Commission sets.
Okay.
So we set.
You set the salary for president, cabinet, MPs, judges, magistrates, governors, MCAs.
Yes.
Okay.
So we set.
Okay.
The Constitution is very clear. It calls it setting. So we set. For the others, it says to advise. Now, what does that advise means? And this has been interpreted in many court cases that it is not advice that you give in vain, right? It is expected that you implement. Today, I can actually say that all institutions implement the advice, right?
To the letter?
Where they do not agree with us, they go to court. So we do have cases that end up in court because for one reason or the other, they then do not agree with what we have advised. Or even some cases, even when we have set, they have a recourse to do that.
You, as a commission, are established by the Constitution. The drafters of this Constitution, of course, had some wisdom in actually making this a constitutional commission, so that it gives you independence of how you think, how you operate, and how you come up with your recommendations and setting of salaries. However, as we have seen, Vitukwa Ground comes with some sort of other additions. Political pressure. Are you insulated from political pressure as a commission?
Absolutely, we are independent. We make independent decisions. But when we talk about being independent as constitutional commissions, that does not mean that we are not interdependent. There is an element of interdependence and collaboration. But at the end of the day, the decision remains with the commission. You make that decision independently. But you work in collaboration. What does that mean for the commission? You will see that before we set for state officers, there was public participation, which is also mandated in the Constitution. For the other public officers, we engaged all the employing entities. That process of engagement, stakeholder participation does not remove your independence. We will get the feedback, but the final decision rests with the commission. So that is where the independence comes from.
Okay. So when you see the president commenting publicly on what you had initially talked about, setting his salary and saying, Pana, I cannot take that salary, that was him responding, public participation.
Yes,
not
please.
the president telling you what to do.
No. He was, because remember, we had just we had just invited we had invited stakeholders to give their memorandum, as it were, right? He is a very important stakeholder. He is a very, very important stakeholder. And therefore, he is within his right to make the comments that he did.
Okay, so you took it as a comment?
We did it as feedback of very important stakeholder, which we then take it like all other stakeholders, and we assess all the feedback we get against the 5 principles of the Constitution, and then we arrive at a decision. But yes, we take all the feedback.
This new pay structure will be in effect for 2 years. It will be implemented in 2 phases. Why did you phase it out?
We phased it out because of the affordability and fiscal sustainability. When we began the review 4 years ago, we projected the review would require about 90 billion. We engaged the National Treasury, and in that we then agreed that for the first years we will freeze, because the country then had just gone through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we know what that meant to the economy. So the country could not afford any pay rise. So for those first 2 years, we therefore froze the pay structures. Now, so these 2 years now is actually the 3rd and 4th year. So again, out of that initial figure, we actually arrived at about 80 billion to be spread over 4 years. So it means that the first 2 years is frozen. The next 2 years now, we face it because it's not affordable to take it at a go. Yes.
Now, you basically effect the pay rise for basic salary and other allowances. What are the main allowances that we're talking about here? House allowance, transport, health?
Only house allowance. And house allowance, today we have 4 clusters, right? It's clustered.
Okay.
So what this review will do is, in the first year, which is this year, the cluster 4 will be reviewed upwards, not across board, but there will be a review, but within that cluster. The second year, the 4th cluster now will merge to cluster 3. So we will effectively have reduced from the 4 to 3 clusters in the 2-year period. So that's the only other allowance that was reviewed.
Okay. Teachers get the lion's share of the increment in this review. Looking at the complaints that have come from teachers over, it's very many years now, what was the reasoning for? And I guess a previous question would be, do you take into consideration what the temperature or what the current situation is in the country when a review like this takes place? And that could be sub 1 question. The other part then is that, why then was the focus on teachers to get this large increment across board?
The first thing is, do we take into account the economic realities? And the answer absolutely is yes.
Okay.
We look at the economic realities, which is, can the country afford? The other thing that we look at is, where are the salaries of the public officers against the market trends? And the reason why we do that is because we've got to ensure that the public service can attract and retain the skills to deliver its services.
Yeah.
So that means that the pay must have some relationship with the market trends. So we take that now to inform where we would like the pay to be. We have set a target of 50th percentile, meaning that we would like to be in the middle of the market, right? Some countries actually target, like Singapore, targets to be the highest paid. And in fact, their public officers are the highest paid. We can't afford that as a country. So you can see our target is already a conservative target to be at the 50th percentile. But we are comfortable with that because our current attrition, people who leave the public service, our retention rate is at 90%. It was 95, it's come down to 90. But it is still within the acceptable level of retention. So we are okay with being at the 50th percentile. We then looked at where each sector currently is against that percentile, right? And some sectors are way above. I can tell you, for example, the state corporations, the Secretariat of Commissions are above 80th percentile. They're at 89th and 84th percentile. When we look at state officers are 45th percentile, universities are 49th percentile. Then we have two sectors that are actually way below. Teaching service is at 36th percentile, and the civil service, both national and county, are at 39th percentile.
Okay.
So that tells you why there is a large amount was allocated to the teaching service. That is one reason. But the other reason is the number. You know, they constitute almost half of the entire. Yes. So it's a question of numbers, but it's also a question of their current positioning to try and move them towards the 50th percentile. It still doesn't get there because we can't afford at the moment to get there. But progressively is to move them towards that so that we then harmonize pay.
Yes.
So you will see that actually this pay review is more about harmonization of pay. Otherwise, everyone would have gotten a pay increase. But that is not the case.
Okay. Can I look at specific teachers being the ECD? We saw a few months ago that there was a reduction in how much they are paid. And of course, there was uproar and flare-ups in terms of why would they go home with so little? What informs a decision like that?
First thing is that that matter is before court, so we may not go into a lot of details. So I can only say that one of the in this pay review, one of the things we've looked at is to ensure that no public officer earns lower than the minimum wage. And that is one of the factors we've looked at is in this pay review. And that obviously would include the ECD teachers and everyone else. The other thing in this pay review is that the ECD teachers will be mapped into the existing structure at the county government. So we will not have a separate structure for ECD teachers. It will be the structure for everyone else. They will be correctly mapped into that structure. But again, as I emphasize, we have ensured that everyone is above the minimum wage.
Well, you talked about the percentiles and how many of these sectors are actually staffed. You will look at it and say there are some parts of, there are some sectors that have a bloated workforce. Am I right?
The word bloated.
It will be in comparison. Comparable to the percentage of the whole, like you're saying, comparable to the services that they offer. For example, you've said commissions and parastatals are way above the 80th to the 89th percentile. And yet if you look overall, the service that they are offering, and overall the service that the teachers sector is offering, then you could say that commissions are bloated. And parastatals are bloated.
No, I think it's important to define what we mean by bloated and what we mean by these percentiles.
Okay.
The first one is these percentiles is not speaking about the amount of money being paid in a sector. It is looking at what you pay in a specific job compared to the private sector.
Okay.
So it is not speaking about whether the wage bill is higher or not. It is simply saying, if I take a driver in a state corporation and compare to a driver in the private sector, in the market that we chose, where is their pay? So you see, that doesn't speak to a bloatation of the wage bill. It just simply says where you are. But to answer your question of, do we have a bloated workforce? Maybe that's a question you could ask. And my response is, again, it's generalizing it, if we put it that way, because there are areas today I can tell you that we probably need more, as I mentioned earlier, the 3 sectors, and I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
But there are areas where we still see some elements of duplication of functions, right? Between even the national and county government, there's some elements of duplication of functions. When we look at some organizational structures of specific institutions, there are some you will see there is a lot of oversplitting of roles. You will have roles being split to the extent that one job has probably 10 grades, you know. So you have officer 1, 2, 3, senior officer 1, 2, 3, you know. So those are specific.
Yeah.
It's not something that we would say it applies to everybody.
Sure.
But to acknowledge that there is need absolutely to relook at the organizational structures to ensure that they are actually optimal.
Which stick out for you? Which institutions or sectors stand out for you as, okay, so here we may need to rationalize.
What stands out?
Yeah.
We need to look at the county governments. And county governments, one of the problems that we see every time there is a transition during the political period, there is an element of over-recruitment, right? So we see that, and you will have seen that even in the current, when the new governors came in, most of them actually took a view that they needed to relook at their establishment. You will have seen governors who came out saying they have identified ghost workers. So there's a number of them carried out an audit. And clearly, it was clear that something is amiss, that there's recruitment that happens during a political transition that shouldn't happen. So yes, there is a concern around the county governments. The second sector is some of the state corporations, definitely. This is where we have seen a lot of oversplitting of roles, where you create jobs purely to speak to a career progression, to ensure someone can progress up to 10 grades, even when it is the same job, not because there is any distinct role they are playing.
Yeah.
So it is a balance between career progression and efficiency and effectiveness. So in some state corporations we see that. Universities, for example, is one I could definitely say. Most state corporations, for example, their job levels is 10, right? Universities operate with 20, right? So that just tells you something is not right there, that we've got to speak about having optimal structures.
Yes.
Yes.
Members of the county assembly are not likely to call you in for a cup of tea anytime soon. They seem to be a little bit upset that they're not recognized or considered for this kind of review. There's been clamour, and they say that in their heads, how they've done a comparison between members of parliament and the president should be the same way in which you should do a comparison between themselves and the county executive being governors. There doesn't seem to be some kind of review for them. What's the reasoning behind this, and what would you have to answer? Because today probably will be the day that you get a lot of complaints.
Well, what the MCAs introduced is a factor that is strange to the principles in the Constitution. Remember, when we started this conversation, we said there are very clear principles that the Commission will use to review pay. And we went through them, you know, affordability, fiscal sustainability, performance and productivity, ability, the need to attract and retain public service, equal pay for work of equal value. None of those speaks about relativity between another job and another, and therefore say because the president and the next one, this is the ratio, so we must apply. So I must say that factor that was introduced is actually not part of what is in the Constitution as a principle for pay determination, right? The second thing is to say what then determines our comparison of pay. And if I pick the principle of equal pay for work of equal value, which is in the SRC Act, it means that we determine the relative worth of the job, not as a ratio of another. We use job evaluation to determine the relative worth of the job. And that is what we have done for the role of an MCA, and then come up with a grade for that job. So that's the pay, therefore, is based on the grade of the job, not relativity with another state officer. And therefore, their pay is within the constitutional principles.
It's from what you have graded. What you've said, equal pay for work of equal value.
Yes, please.
So how do you then bring an MCA to whatever grade you've placed them?
At the moment, they are in a grade.
Work of what equal value?
We call all jobs have, we assign a grade, right? We assign a job grade. When it comes to state officers, you will see, for example, that, you know, we have, they are at D4, right? The president starts at F5, then the deputy F4. And we go all the way down. A CS is an F2. The next category, like a PS, is an F1. So that's the way it is structured. From then we go to D, then they are at D4.
Okay.
So it means that as a state officer, we then say if you are an F1, then all F1s have the same pay structure. So you will see, for example, if I talk about an F1, would be a PS, chairs of commissions, member of parliament. So you will see their pay is the same. So that means it is equal pay for work of equal value, because we have assigned the worth of the job based on a process. We have assigned a grade, and therefore that grade then has equal pay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you come to D4, who else is in D4?
The magistrates.
So D4 is MCA, magistrates, and who else?
That's it.
Because we're looking at, let me just look at the structure, the current salary. Okay. President is at 1.44 million shillings, deputy 1.227, prime cabinet secretary, head of civil service 924,000, PSs, IGs, directors of NIS, yourselves in the commission 765, and then we have governor 924, deputy governor 621, county executive 404, member of the county assembly 144. Now the complaint that they've been having is 144 is not commensurate with the work that they are expected to do as legislators, as representatives of the people, as legislators, and to oversight the executive whose CECs are at 4 times their salary.
Right.
And they compare that to an MP who's doing the job of oversighting a PS who's earning 765 when an MP is earning 710, or an CS who is earning 900 and an MP is earning 710.
Okay, let's start with clarifying the pay of an MCA.
Yes.
What you have quoted there is the salary less sitting allowances.
Yes.
If you further go down, you'll see how much the sitting allowance is, and you need to add that. So it's actually over 200,000. So it's not that figure. So we must acknowledge that sitting allowance is not pay. It is pay, right? But at the moment, there is a discussion that tends to say we don't acknowledge it as pay, right? We operate from a gross pay. Even when I talked about the market positioning, the percentiles I gave you earlier, it is based on gross pay. So we take into account...
And gross pay is basic salary plus
all allowances you earn. All allowances, including the sitting allowances.
Okay.
So that's the first clarification, is what does an MCA earn? Please add all the allowances that are based on. So for them, we add sitting allowance. Of course, we don't add DSA, that's facilitative. So we add remunerative allowances.
And the sitting allowance is when they sit in committees or when they sit in plenary?
In committees. Plenary, that one ceased to apply from last year, right? So that's the first thing. The second clarification is, does it mean if I'm oversighting a higher role, I should be at the same grade? The Member of Parliament oversights the entire executive, including the President. Do they earn the same pay? Absolutely not.
But if you were going to do a comparison, and this is, I think, where the argument comes in, that if we're saying that they are going to oversight, and it doesn't mean that the person or the persons that they oversight, that they would earn commensurate to, or, to what they earn, they're saying that if you look at what they are earning in comparison to what they on this side are earning when they do oversight in the executive, that there is a greater difference, much greater difference.
The response to that is, does oversighting have anything to do with what you pay? Do you say, because I'm paid this, I cannot oversight you? You draw your mandate to oversight from the law. You don't draw your mandate to oversight from pay.
Okay.
So, and therefore, it doesn't matter if I've been given a role to oversight, I will oversight by virtue of the authority you derived from the law, from the Constitution. You don't derive it from pay. So that's very important to understand where we are coming from.
Sure.
Right? The second clarification is, when we evaluate the job, we take into account the three key roles. We take into account the role of representation, we take into account the role of oversight, and we take into account the third role of legislation.
Yeah.
So the entire three roles as specified in law is taken into account in evaluating the job.
They feel that the SRC diminishes their value and their work. They draw their mandate from the people who send them to the county assembly. They also have a very important role to play, which is to ensure that devolution works. And when devolution works, it means that development at local level actually does function. And when an MCA is not paid anything that compares to who they're oversighting or the work that they do, then they feel that they're let down. For example, they also talk about the allowances. So their only allowance right now is their committee sitting allowance. And then they do not receive any other support in terms of even getting the car grant. They say, when we get a car grant, it's then taxed. When a member of parliament is getting a car grant, it's tax-free. Why are we being treated different? Why are they being treated different?
The issue about tax, I may not speak to it, because remember, that is not the mandate of SRC. It's KRA that decides to tax, and I'm not sure that they are not taxing everyone equally. That one is really something that I can't speak to. We do set, KRA decides who they tax. And we cannot say you want to cushion anyone from tax. The Constitution is very clear that every person must pay tax. So that's a different conversation around taxation. Are they being treated fairly? First, let's go back to before the elections. Remember that we did gazette the pay. So even as an MCA, a member of parliament, as they were vying for these seats, they knew exactly what the pay structure looks like. It wasn't an ambush. It was published. Everybody knew. And you took the job knowing what you will be paid for. So that's very important to understand, that you took the job and you knew what the pay
They feel that you published this halfway through an interview process. somebody has already started campaigning, then just weeks to the election, which is when the final interview is taking place, the employer comes and says, oh, by the way, this job earns you this much. That is unfair.
I disagree, because it was in public participation way months before that. It was there. It was in the public domain. And surely if I'm interested in a job and I see it is going through public participation, I must have seen it. Yes, we published about a month before, but before that, 2 to 3 months earlier, it had been in public domain. So again, I don't agree with that it was an ambush, because everybody knew what it looks like. And let me also say that, and it is not the first time that the salary of an MCA was being set. It was there before, right? So again, even if you didn't know what yours would look like, you knew the previous.
You knew what it was.
You knew what it was.
Into it.
Exactly.
Lyn Mengich, thank you very much for joining us today.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.